Camp Hill Presbyterian Church, 100 years of history. It was September 21st, 1916, when a community of Presbyterians in Camp Hill were recognized as a congregation by the Carlisle Presbytery. It is the day Camp Hill Presbyterian Church marks its anniversary. Initially, our congregation met in the upstairs room of the firehouse. Despite these cramped quarters, our church grew, and in 1925 the congregation of 143 members marched from the firehouse to their new church home on 23rd and Walnut. Soon the building was too small for the growing congregation, so in 1939, toward the end of Reverend Snitcher's time with us, ground was broken for a Sunday school wing, which became the East Wing. Again, in 1949, under the leadership of Reverend Spencer Smith, the church expanded the sanctuary, added a choir room, and offices. But as Reverend Smith so beautifully stated, we must remember, the church is not made of stone and steel, but of people, men, women, youth, united in faith and love in Jesus Christ, our Lord. Reverend Smith's leadership was important to many people in our church. Charlene Silvis remembers him fondly.
My name is Charlene Silvis. I came to this church in 1968. My first husband was Rick Freeman, and we were straight out of college, and we had been married for, I don't know, perhaps it had been a year or so, and we were struggling with trying to decide what church we might attend. It so happened the first church we tried was Camp Hill Presbyterian. And Spencer Smith was the minister, and he did the sermon that day. And after hearing Spencer Smith's sermon and hearing the wonderful choir, we decided immediately this would be the church for us. We didn't even go to the Methodist church or the Baptist church. I'll never forget one of Spencer's sermons. The title of it was "Keep On Keeping On." Those words have always meant so much to me because I've had difficulties, as everyone does in life, and yet those words keep coming back and have kept coming back. Keep on keeping on. So Spencer Smith has had a long, I don't know if you would call it an era, but many years of influence on the members of Camp Hill Presbyterian Church, and I'm one of them.
Dad also spent a lot of time working on the worship services. I remember he spent an enormous amount of time organizing the communion service. The elders sat around the table, and the congregation sat around the table, and then they'd come up, they'd stand up two by two. We had 12 elders each time serving. So Dad's really spent a lot of time organizing that. He also organized the Easter services. We'd start out with a sunrise service, then we'd have 3 worship services. There'd be 12 to 1,300 people come. In the Christmas Eve services, he started the candlelight services here. The choir said they weren't going to sing. So he said, well, we'll have the congregation sing. And anyway, the choir finally decided they'd sing. But those candlelight services, I can remember them from the time I was 5 or 6 until I went away to college and things.
Of course, Reverend Spencer Smith was special to all of us. He has left a legacy that affects even those of us who never knew him. But Camp Hill Presbyterian Church has been blessed by many talented and caring leaders, from our senior pastors to our Christian educators. From our choir masters to our visitation pastor, to our associate pastors. Our leaders have enriched our faith journey, worked side by side with us on our missions, and tended to the needs of our congregation. Gwen Forson remembers the guidance and care of Reverend Jim Miller.
And this church has seen me through many trials and tribulations, and one of my really, really heartfelt thoughts go with Jim Miller. Jim was a rock for me, and I've always loved that man. He will be in my memories forever. And one time he was doing bread. He had the kids down there, and they're all looking at the bread dough, and we were watching. And he says, "Does anybody want to knead the bread?" And I said, "I would." And so I was kneading the bread. He said, "You've done this before." Well, I really hadn't, but I knew how to do it from watching my mother. And I remember the bread. He always had the wonderful bread that he made. And riding his bike. I'd see him all over Camp Hill riding his bike. But the time I came into him really in distress, we sat in his office for probably an hour and a half and talked. And he just knew how to help you. He really did. He was just really special.
Eleanor Ham tells of a healing encounter with Dr. David Rockmore.
When I was in the first or second hospital, they gave me medicine that crossed. I was having hallucinations. I saw my daughter, Sandy, standing over there near the door, and I saw my son-in-law because he was taller than everybody else, and my whole family was there. And I just looked and looked, and all of a sudden, Dave Rockmore came in and stood right there and somebody said, "What shall we do?" And he said, "Let's pray." And he prayed, and I lost that hallucination. It just went. And I knew why. I didn't know why at the time, but when I analyzed it, I said to Sandy, "You know, you were meant to be there." She said, "Well, they didn't call the family in." I said, "No, you were called in." Mm-hmm. And I said, and David Rockmore was called in.
The Hummels have served our congregation in many roles. Here Roger tells us about a challenging time in our church when our staff was in flux, and how David Binkley's dedication and leadership was an inspiration.
Hard for times, and we have had some times over the years when things have been kind of low and the church wasn't going real well, but there were always those people that kept it going. David Binkley was one of the ones when we probably didn't have any pastors, that he kept the thing moving behind the scenes, and that was inspirational to me to see, even though you go through some really tough times, you get re-fired up and go at it again.
Our staff members have led us to a deeper faith in many ways, not the least of which has been through music. Eleanor Ham herself has contributed her professional musicianship to both our brass choir and our sanctuary choir. Some of the most poignant moments in our church relate to our music program.
The church.
Well, we joined the church in '76. And the first time we came to this church, we were a bit overwhelmed. The music was wonderful. And the next Sunday, we came back and stayed because of the music, mainly. It was just wonderful.
Most of my activities in the church have always been centered around the choirs. And there were some memorable occasions when, years ago, we used to take kids up to Camp Hill for a week, music camp. But I remember one year, Camp Hill Choir joined with Trinity Lutheran, and we did Rudder's Requiem, combined choirs. And that's something that I will never forget.
And my children were in the choirs, as Bud's children were also. And at one point we had the Carol Choir, which was kindergarten and first and second grades. And then there was Westminster Choir that was like 4th, 5th, 6th grades. There was the Chapel Choir, which was junior high. And there was the Chancel Choir, which was high school students, and Sanctuary Choir, which was the adults. And every single Sunday that any of these choir organizations sang, there were a lot of kids and a lot of people. I mean, everybody in the church who had kids was in a choir. Just received. And not too long ago, David was still here, and I was looking on the shelf to pick up some music, and for some reason David had these little plastic containers of bow ties on the shelf, which the carol choir wore. The boys wore white
Dark
shirts
pants and white shirts.
and dark pants and the bow tie. And on it was my son's name, who is now 53.
I'm Beth Fine, and I've been involved at CHPC since 1970 when my parents, Jim and Shirley Campbell, joined the church. And so many of my friends from childhood that I grew up with in the church are still active here, and I just treasure those relationships. But when I think back, what comes to mind, the most vivid memories, I have to say, being part of the choir has always been an integral part of being involved here at the church. My first year in choir, in carol choir, was Mr. Binkley's first year here on staff. So I have no memories of Mr. Skolton really, but I do have indelible memories of David Binkley teaching us to sing by rote different pieces and being part of worship with the carol choir and then Westminster choir. And that was a really special experience for me and those of us who were in Westminster choir in the mid-70s. We had a very special opportunity to sing with the Harrisburg Symphony Orchestra. It was a piece called Night Voices that the composer needed a children's choir to provide the night voices, the sounds of animals. I remember we mimicked owls and crickets, and it was a pretty unusual piece, but it was just so different to learn our parts in the music room with Mr. Binkley teaching us, and then the day of the performance, getting in a school bus with our choir robes in hand and going over to the Forum in Harrisburg, going into the green room to change into our choir robes and performing with the orchestra. It was really just such a memorable experience.
Another memorable experience happened in 2008 when we finally got our new Chantz pipe organ. Daniel Doherty, our organist choir master, describes this wonderful instrument.
This is a 2008 Chantz 3-manual pipe organ, all pipe, no digital, 42 ranks, and this organ was built with a lot of love and care, and it is a fine instrument, and it has some unique things on it, like what we call a Zimbelstern with little bells. There's a big festival trumpet, as well as a few other unique stops on here. There's a crumb horn, and the organ has about 2,500 pipes, and it is an absolute pleasure to play on a weekly basis. Camp Hill Presbyterian Church has had an incredible history of music, fine music throughout the years, and as we move forward, I look forward to the choir programs growing and getting more people involved and, just worshiping God through music and song.
Music has played a prominent role in our church life, but so have our youth programs. Over the years, our children and youth have been a vital part of our church life, from their participation in our church choirs to their mission work. One shared memory that surfaces in many conversations is the shared experience of CIS, or Christians in Service.
Well, CIS was the kind of generic term that we used for the youth program at the time, and it stood for Christians in Service. And the I was not capitalized because I was insignificant to what we were presenting as our faith in Christ. Having children growing up at that point, I became involved and later led the program. We went on service trips. The kids that had completed 9th through 11th grade could go on a local trip to a local church in Harrisburg that was in need of some sort of service. Sometimes they taught Bible school, sometimes they painted, sometimes they There was one time they created a garden in the neighborhood, a flower garden, but just to help make the neighborhood nicer. That was on Allison Hill.
But after confirmation, I really enjoyed my time in CIS, Christians in Service, which was the high school youth group. And we had a wonderful mission program where those who were new to CIS first year would go to Harrisburg on a mission project for a week. And we would go to one of the churches in Harrisburg and do mission projects there. And my group went to Covenant Church, which is no longer in the presbytery, sadly. As I recall, we painted the nursery. A couple of the guys worked on actually repairing the pipe organ. They glued patches together and applied them where needed to the organ to repair that. And then the rest of the team worked on roofing repair at the church. We slept on the church floor. The church had a bowling alley. It was really quite fun. We spent a lot of time there and playing basketball in their gym. And I recall the church staff was really quite wonderful, and they wanted to get us out into the community and help us to understand what it meant to live in the city.
But I'd also like to talk a little bit about CIS and how it affected my sons. They both went on trips out. They did the Harrisburg trips, and then one of them went to Jamaica, and he helped build the sewer pit. And the other one went to Tennessee, and he cut tobacco. And when it came time for lunch, that knife that they were using to cut the tobacco, they cut the can of Spam with it. I don't think I'll ever forget them telling me that. But they both enjoyed those trips, and I think they understand the feelings of people who are poor and maybe uneducated. They certainly handle themselves well as adults, and they try and do for others.
Laura, what's the most fun you ever had with that group of teenagers?
Preparing 200 apple pies.
What would you say is the most fun you ever had at Camp Hill Presbyterian Church?
Probably making apple pies. I would be absolutely aghast at the number of apple pies that Edie Flurkey could form together in a big pan like this. I'm just one of those people who has to follow the recipe, and if I make 2 crusts for apple pie, that's a big to-do for me. She was making crusts for 10 to 15 apple pies. I thought that was marvelous.
No, our youth no longer make apple pies, but they still have their share of fun and ministry. Today we call our high school youth PYC for Presbyterian Youth Connection, and our middle schoolers have their own group called RAP, Really Awesome Presbyterians. Regardless of the name, CHPC's youth continue to be a vital presence in our church. Now their mission work includes MATE, Youth Works, and Vacation Bible School, to name a few of their involvements. Gavin Davis, one of our 7th graders, shares a moving insight about his experience at Vacation Bible School last summer.
Hi, I'm Gavin Davis. I was a shepherd this year at VBS, and it was my first time being the shepherd. Last year I was a person that helped out with the games, but this year when I was a shepherd, it really changed the way I look at VBS. Because when I was a kid, I always went just to see like all of my friends and snacks. But now, when I was a shepherd this year, I got to really meet the kids and play with them, and I took them around, and it really helped me show how they learn, how God's Word affects them.
One of the most effective links between our youth and our adults is MATE, which stands for Mission at the Eastward. Every summer, Nancy and Dan Flint organize a group of members, friends, and one of our pastors to go to Farmington, Maine. There they work on the homes of people in need of a helping hand. As our members work together, they learn about each other. They also learn about serving God by serving others. Many groups serve mate, but Camp Hill Presbyterian Church has become extremely important to the organization since we have provided teams with the expertise to complete some complicated jobs. This was our 31st year with mate, and the 11th year we have gone with the Presbyterians from Ramsey, New Jersey. Here, Dan Flint talks about the work done this summer.
And over the years, our Camp Hill group has developed into one of the go-to groups for mate, as far as the size of projects, the number and the complexity of projects that we do. So this year they had assigned 10 projects for our group to do. We ended up doing 15 projects. We flew through the list that they gave us and kept on going.
Dan's words, we kept on going. Spencer's words, keep on keeping on. They capture the spirit of our congregation. We work hard in service because we have always understood that it is our mission to show Christ's love through our actions. So many members have worked selflessly toward the greater good of our church, our community, and the world around. It is difficult to name all the saints of our church, but we can look at some of our church's groups and their contributions. At Camp Hill Presbyterian, it is always safe to start with the women.
One of the things that I've always remembered, and this is a life lesson, Dad would spend an enormous amount of time planning things. He said that preaching was easy and administration was easy, but the planning was very difficult. And whenever there would be a building campaign to raise money, he would have to find some prominent man in our church, and we had a lot of them in those days, to head up the committee. And then he would get about 4 or 5 women who would do all the work. And these women organized everything. The man was the front, and the women did all the work. And they were marvelous. They just, I can't tell you how much work those women did. But if it weren't for those women, I don't think our church would ever have been built.
Because when I taught Sunday school, the first year or so, I had the 3 and 4-year-olds, Sunday morning. And then they asked me to do 5th, 6th grade, and I had them. And sometimes the boys could not sit still. The girls were just wonderful students.
How long did you teach Sunday school on vacation?
11 years.
Probably my claim to fame is working in the kitchen, because I was in charge of the kitchen for 20-some years. And we started the senior lunch bunch, and there was a lot of things that I did that I had a lot of fun at. One of my really funny memories of the kitchen was a new member dinner that I did for new members and communicants and their families. It was really big. And I got everything set up. I had 2 serving lines, everything to go. I made the instructions of how they were to go through the line and all. And then I went out in the kitchen. I let them get started. And pretty soon, Bern Smith came out there, and real quietly he said to me, "Gwen, do you think we ought to have plates?" I had put all the food out, but no plates. And I still laugh about that when I see Bern. I think of that.
Dawn and Gwen are only a few of our women involved in the life of the church. As a group, our Women's Association has been active since the very beginning. Today, the mission of the Presbyterian women is to nurture our faith through prayer and Bible study, to support the mission of the church worldwide, to work for justice and peace, and to build an inclusive, caring community of women that strengthens the Presbyterian Church and witnesses to the promise of God's kingdom. This is accomplished through the circles and other groups like Women's Prayer Fellowship and Quilters and Crafters for Mission. Mary Lou Moran, Linda Kelly, and the other crafters tell the story of their group.
It started in 1998 when Ann Ross was headed off to seminary. And Lila Miller, Betsy Gregory, and I sent out the word throughout the congregation, or the women who we thought might like to help with a quilt, a farewell quilt for Ann going. And got a wonderful response, and we had so much fun working on it that we decided we've got to keep the group going. So Norma Oakes became the teacher of hand quilting, and that started us off in the fall of 1998.
I think Lila had come up with a bunch of different things like the Binky Patrol and knitting those sweaters for guideposts, things. And then the prayer shawls came a little bit later, and I'm not sure who read about that or...
Well, that was again through Ann Ross. Her mother had gone to a church where they were doing prayer shawls, and she told Ann that maybe our group would like to start working on a project like that. Peg Alford's quilt was the first commission.
I remember each square had like 60 pieces in it. It was terrible.
Lee Alford picked the color.
I think
Lila Miller picked the pattern.
Yeah. Did Lila?
Yeah. I remember Dottie Dellison. Whenever Lila would pick a difficult pattern, she would say, "Lila, that's too difficult." But Lila had her mind made up.
It was lovely.
It turned out more beautiful, I think, than the one that was on the cover of the Quilting magazine.
Although our quilters and crafters have lost track of the number of quilts, guidepost sweaters, prayer shawls, school bags, and binkies that they have made, we do know that from their craft sales alone, the Quilters and Crafters for Mission have raised $11,690 for the Presbyterian Women's Mission Fund. Of course, our men have been equally involved in leadership, mission, and outreach.
Because I was not the active person in church. Harry was. I was just his tag-along. My husband and Steve had a hard line for a while with the phone when they were doing something with the air conditioning. Every evening, the phone would ring. Oh, that's Steve. And they just had a fun time. He'd go down and figure out what was wrong, and he loved Steve, and Steve loved him.
Janet, you said Steve had a good relationship with the Worm men?
Yeah, that was a group of men. How many was it? About 10, 12, 14?
10, 12, 15.
12, 14 of them. They met on Tuesdays, right? Yeah, Tuesdays they met, and they went to the church and fixed what needed fixed. Every Tuesday, then they'd go out to lunch. But working
order of retired men.
One of my fun things was doing spring cleanup and spreading mulch in a blizzard. Gee, this is fun, spring's coming.
We've done it downtown Daily Bread and things like that over the years.
And on a smaller scale, he helps with the grounds, with maintaining the flower beds and helping out with cleanup day and things like that, just to
but I also
help the place look nice beyond what the normal crew does.
When we first joined the church, Starkey Gregory joined about that same time and decided the church needed a softball team. So I signed on for that, and again, that was the catalyst for a lot of lifelong friends that we had. We all brought our kids to the ball games, our wives to the ball games, and those kids grew up together, and they have remained our good friends throughout those years, and it's really, again, as I said, been a blessing for us and for our family.
Whether we are men, women, or youth, what is most important is that we work together side by side as deacons, elders, and volunteers. Sometimes the opportunities available for us as volunteers lead to life-changing relationships. John Alford talks about one such opportunity that he almost missed.
And it was a holiday weekend that I came to church with Peggy, and there was an announcement in the bulletin that the churches in the area had agreed to sponsor the Lost Boys of Sudan. I didn't pay much attention to that at the time. I came back another couple of Sundays, and the advertisement had changed somewhat, not just announcing that they were coming to the United States, but they would need to learn how to drive. And would somebody please volunteer to teach them to drive? Again, I ignored that announcement in the bulletin. And then my children both came for a holiday, and my daughter Lee said, "Dad, you can teach those guys to drive because you taught us to drive on that big old station wagon, and if we can learn, they can learn." So I thought about it, and I was to call Bobby Kitzmiller. I called her phone number, didn't get a person, but I got an answering machine. So I explained that I would teach one of them to drive. Well, a couple of evenings later, I returned home after work, and there's a message on my answering machine now from Bobby Kitzmiller thanking me for agreeing to teach both of them to drive. So Michael Paul was the first one that I visited. And when I went in, Michael Paul was reading a book because he was enrolled in Hack. But I asked Michael, "Why do you want to learn how to drive?" And he said, "Because currently all of us are riding the bus over to Carlisle to work. If I could have a car to get myself a job closer here and be more independent, I could spend more time studying." And I thought that was a very valid reason for wanting to learn how to drive. His cousin James had a different education in Africa than Michael Paul had. James was put into a service track, a trades track, and he had learned how to be a stonemason. I asked James why he wanted to learn how to drive, and James' answer was very simple. He said, "I understand that driving is a very important American skill, and I need to have that very important American skill."
Of course, the work of the Alfords, the Flurkeys, Bobby Kitzmiller, and many others touched the lives of our Sudanese friends and helped them successfully pursue their goals. Charlie Appleby has seen this kind of work throughout his membership here.
It was inspiring, too, the church's program with the Lost Boys of the Sudan, Vietnam refugees. We even had some from Russia, I believe, wasn't it? Or the Ukraine?
Yeah, I believe so.
And so we have a very solid program in doing that, and it's inspiring that that's reaching out and helping others that need the help. And I thought we're really doing something good here.
Way back in the 40s, Spencer Smith got in touch with a pastor in Germany after the war, and a 20-year relationship followed that hardly anybody here even remembers. So this congregation has an ongoing major mission emphasis. At the same time, it acts like a small church because people make friends and really do care for each other, love each other, take care of each other in ways that you don't expect a big church to do. So.
We have such a community of faith that
no matter what, we just keep rolling. We keep pulling together, the good times, the bad times. There is just this core of people that is always here and is doing the work, and you can always count on them.
Years with our kids. Roger Hummel came up to me one Sunday morning and asked if I'd be interested in being a deacon, and here I am 12, 13 years later, and I know a lot more about what that means than what I knew at the time. But that was a blessing as well, because getting involved in the church, my wife and I have both been very involved with Christian education, as well as serving on staff, not staff positions, but on officer positions. So 3 years as a deacon, 6 years as an elder, and I've just retired as an elder, and Leslie's come in as a deacon. So we're continuing with that. We've taken the kids to Downtown Daily Bread. That's fun. Soon, sometime in the next 3 or 4 years, hopefully go up to Mate and experience that, which is obviously a big part of the tradition of this church. You know, we're a church of doers. We don't hire staff to handle everything. It wasn't always the church that my wife and I knew when we were growing up, but we're glad to be in a place where everybody needs to be involved. You take ownership in your faith life and others' faith journey. So it's been rewarding, and here's to another 100 years.